Good morning, America. This is Pastor Charles Burnett Morrow here, representing Forward Christian Life Center, a new work in Nashville, Tennessee. We are a progressive, spirit-filled ministry. Yes, you can have a spirit-filled church that believes in the Bible, that absolutely believes Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life, and at the same time believes that all sincere believers, whatever their status in life, whatever their situation, whatever their sexual orientation, race, skin color, those things which divide us in the carnal world, do not divide us in the church, because in the church we all recognize that we are, each and every one of us, sinners saved by grace. So if you live in the Nashville, Tennessee area, I certainly encourage you, please come check us out. We are having church right now in the Comfort Suites on Percy Priest Drive in Nashville, and we invite you to come and worship with us, grow with us. I guarantee you, your walk with God will grow. You will benefit. You will be blessed. And whether you're straight, gay, I like to say, whether you're straight, gay, cross-eyed, or blind, you will in fact benefit from this ministry, I assure you. And one thing you will learn, my mother told me years ago, when she was part of our church in Dallas for many years, over 15, I believe. And my mother said, you know, the one thing about your church that I love is that you teach love, and you teach people simply to love. And when you learn to love people and you concentrate on loving people, no matter what differences you may have, no matter regardless of differences in the way you live your life, this sort of thing. When you learn to love people, folks, life is so much easier. It is so much more positive. It is so much more pleasant. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about the church. I like to put a little plug in for the church at the start. This podcast, A Voice of Reason in Turbulent Times, I just started it recently. People don't understand that as a pastor, there are certain things that I'd rather not necessarily have to talk about from the pulpit, but that does not mean that as a Christian and as a Christian leader, I don't have an opinion on these issues. But it's a matter of finding the right platform. And so I created this podcast with the thought in mind that this would be my platform. This is where I can sit with you, my friends, and I can discuss things which are troubling me. We can talk current events. We can talk politics. We can talk about anything we want to talk about. And this platform is a better place to do that than to have to talk about these things from the pulpit. And so we are here to discuss, don't mind me, I went and ran in today. I've got some things on my heart that I want to talk about today. And I ran in so fast trying to get on the air that I failed to do a couple of things. So now here I am trying real hard to get some things done that I should have done one of which was open my Diet Dr. Pepper and have it on the ready because I tend to get a little dry mouth and start coughing, you know. And I forgot to get my Dr. Pepper ready. Well, wouldn't you know, as I went to open it, I dropped the can. And of course, that got it all fizzed up and ready to overflow. So now I'm sitting here trying to gather up paper real quick to clean up my mess. One thing about Pastor Charles you'll learn real fast is this. What you see is what you get, folks. I am an imperfect man. I don't claim to be perfect. I have my thoughts. I have my opinions. I grew up in a very opinionated family. I'll be honest with you. I can be opinionated. I have strong opinions, in other words. I'm not somebody who looks at something and just, you know, makes an off-the-cuff opinion concerning it. I tend to look into things very carefully, and I come to a conclusion, and when I come to a conclusion, I develop a very strong opinion on the subject. So yes, I can be opinionated. I also happen to be very plain-spoken. A lot of people don't understand, but I'm from New England. I'm not from the South. When I first moved to the South back in 1982, I kept hearing people use a phrase, and it started really kind of getting on my nerve. I kept hearing people say, well, you know, I was offended when this person did this, and I was offended when that person did that, or they said this or said that. And I'm hearing people, and that phrase, being offended, man, I was hearing that an awful lot. And I thought to myself, what on earth is wrong with these people that every little thing, it's like they wear their feeling on their shirt sleeve. Every little thing offends them. In the Northeast, where I come from, we tend to be pretty plain-spoken folks. And you can work with somebody and have a bad day and tell them off, so to speak, you know, or read them the riot act because they're lazy and they don't want to work or whatever the case might be. And you come to work the next day and you, hey, Joe, how are you? Fine, Charles, how are you? And you move on. We just don't, I don't know how to explain it. We don't wear our feelings on our shirt sleeves that way. Excuse me. So anyway, so I probably tend to go over in the South like a, you know, like a porcupine in a balloon factory, you know, because down here everybody's so busy trying to be genteel, and honestly, they're not being genuine. They're being insincere, and you know, they'll sit there and they'll act like they care. They'll act like they're the least bit concerned when the whole time they are in full disagreement, and they condemn you and they criticize you and they have bad thoughts about you. And now certainly I'm not saying that we shouldn't, you know, behave as decent people and conduct ourselves well, and I certainly do that on a day-to-day basis. But what I'm trying to get at is, when I'm sitting behind the microphone and I have the chance to speak my mind about something, I'm not likely to pull too many punches. I'm not likely to hold back very much. I'm going to say exactly what I think because I think exactly what I'm going to say. Now, having said that, let's get into our podcast today. Folks, Donald Trump has started out with a bang. He is doing exactly what I said he is doing with one executive order after another. He is undoing many of the actions taken by President Biden. He is taking action that is once again opening LGBT people up to potential trouble. He is removing protections for LGBT people. And let me fill you in. Let me help you understand what they're doing. And again, I want to repeat, I say what they're doing, because Donald Trump is only the head of the zit. He is not the whole problem, okay? There's a whole bunch of people that are propping him up that want him to do exactly what he's doing. And that bunch of people goes down through senators and congressmen, all governors and leaders in state government, all the way down to people in local law enforcement, so on and so forth. They went in with an agenda. He had a list this time in his hand of specific actions that he should take. And he is spending the time to one by one sign these things, and sign off on these executive orders and what have you. And he is doing everything in his power. Listen to me now, folks. He is doing everything in his power. You're not going to hear this from other podcasts because they don't say these things. I operate within the prophetic, and I'm telling you what God has shown me, and I'm here to tell you today, he is in the process of making it so that LGBT people and people of color can be harassed, can be murdered, can be tormented, can be prejudice can be exercised toward them relative to jobs, relative to housing, so on and so forth. And what he is doing is he is making it so that anyone who performs an act against a person of color, against a LGBT person, whether that be denying them housing, denying them a job based on their race, based on their sexual orientation, based on their gender identification, anyone who commits a violent act toward these people, they cannot be held, they will not be charged with a hate crime. So what he's doing is he is making it so that people who engage in these type of acts will face a much lesser, much less severe punishment if convicted. And so folks on the other side who have been waiting for years for this opportunity, they are lining up and they're getting ready. And I promise you, as much as I hate to say it, I promise you they will shortly begin to exercise their new liberty. Any thinking person in this country, and we know that there are very few thinking people within Republican ranks, but any thinking person in this country would recognize that the actions being taken at this time by Donald Trump are literally, this is an assault on the liberties of millions and millions of Americans. He is beginning his grab for dictatorial power. He is establishing a religious law in America based on the religious beliefs and convictions of one specific group in America, one specific segment of the Christian population, because there are a number of denominations in the United States, including, I might add, the church that Donald Trump claims he attended, which his sister, the former federal judge who has since passed away, she told us while she was living in a recording made by her niece, as the niece was speaking to her aunt, and we heard her say Donald is a huckster. He never went to church. He doesn't care anything about God. He has no religious beliefs at all. He's just saying all that to fool the dummies who buy into anybody who says the word God, anybody who talks about faith or God or religion. All of a sudden, these bunch of knuckleheads jump on board and they're behind that individual regardless of what the reality is relative to their character, their personality, their integrity, so on as their morality. They don't care about any of those things. As long as you spew out the word God once in a while, as long as you say something about the Bible, as long as you make reference to faith, then they'll get behind you. Oh, I forgot to mention, you also have to have an R behind your name, because all the Democrats who do this, according to them, are just fakers, you know. Joe Biden spoke of faith often, you know, and referred to God often and what have you. But, oh no, of course, anybody with a D behind their name, we just ignore any references to God, and we don't believe for 1 second that they possess any faith. And after all, we are the judges. We are the ones who are supposed to make the judgment as to who, in fact, is genuine and who is not genuine in their faith. So what we're seeing right now, folks, is a massive onslaught of assaults against the liberties of the American people. If there's anything that drives me crazy, it is the fact that these people on the religious right are ignorant. I'm going to say it again. You can get as mad at me as you want to. They are ignorant. I don't care if they are a judge. I don't care if they're a lawyer. I don't care if they're a doctor. I don't care if they're a surgeon. I don't care if they're an astronaut. They are ignorant. Because anyone who knows history understands that when you give the power of a dictator to someone, yes, they may at first, because oftentimes, you know, if you look at a lot of dictators historically, Mussolini made the trains run on time. That was his big claim to fame. You know, he made the trains run on time. And that was something that really got in people's craw. And that was something that really drove people nuts. So the fact that he was able to do that initially, early, made the people love him. It endeared him to them, okay? And when someone is stepping up into a dictatorial position, what happens is they will first do any number of things in order to garner the praise and the worship of the people. Okay, Donald Trump is a disgusting, vile narcissist. And he loves worship. He loves to be adored. He can't stand even the slightest negative word or anything being said to him, in fact, that disagrees with his position or his thoughts on any issue. And what he is doing right now, he's signing all these things. He's doing it publicly. He's making a circus out of it, making a show out of it, so he can hear the applause and he can hear the cheers of his support, you know, of his base. But what these people without faith fail, what they fail to recognize is when a dictator begins to crack down on the liberties of any citizens, you can know for a fact that he is eventually going to get to you. Okay? There is something that every single one of us do. There is something within every one of us that does not fit right in perfectly with the religious right's view of morality and decency. Okay? And some of these folks who are cheering now aren't going to be cheering after a little while, because all of a sudden, as the old saying goes, you know, when they came for the trade unions, I didn't say anything. When they came for these, I didn't say anything. When they came for those, I didn't say anything. And when they came for me, there was no one to speak for me, because eventually they get to you. Without fail, they get to you. And people think, you know, oh, everything he's doing is great. Everything he's doing is wonderful. No, everything he is doing is preventing any number of American citizens from enjoying full freedom and liberty in this country. I have said it before, and I'll say it again. If I am to be free to worship God, to serve God, and to preach the gospel, then I must allow the wife swapper to be free to swap his wife with, you know, another man and his wife. Do I agree with that? No. Do I support that? No. Does that fall within the purview of my moral convictions? No. But the reality of liberty and freedom is it must be across the board or else. And that's a big or else. The minute you begin to apply your Sharia law, which is what the religious right is trying to do, the minute you try to apply your Sharia law, you are going to start cracking down, and boy, this is fun. Look at this. Look what we've been able to accomplish here. Now we can crack down on how people dress. Now we can make it against the law for women to wear yoga pants out in public. Now we can make it against the law for women to wear cut-off shirts and what have you. And you think I'm teasing, you think I'm kidding, you think it'll never come to that. Baby, I cannot wait until it does. And all of a sudden, you're going to be crying into your beer because you cannot live your life as you wish to live your life. You can't dress and you can't do like you'd like to do. And all of a sudden, the state is in charge of what kind of movies are made and what messages are allowed and are not allowed within the film industry. If they don't agree with the message of a given film, they'll quash it. Say, nope, that doesn't fit in with our agenda. Therefore, that movie cannot be released. And all of a sudden now, every news source does nothing but push propaganda. And all you ever hear is the same garbage coming from every source. Everywhere you turn your head, you're going to be hearing the same thing. And what happens is you're going to put yourself in a position where there is no positivity, no encouragement, nothing that inspires you to act within your better angel. No. Everything is going to be grievance. Everything is going to be complaint. Everything is going to be threats, because dictators love to threat. Everything is going to be new rules by the day. There's a new rule today, there'll be a new rule tomorrow. And your liberties will be chipped away more and more and more. That is why our founding fathers created the Constitution, and the Constitution provided for the freedoms and liberties of every citizen. And when certain citizens finally were recognized as having freedoms in specific areas, and in this instance, I'll use gay marriage, for instance. When the Supreme Court decided that, yes, LGBT people have the right to marry one another as much as straight people do. Okay? And all of a sudden, however, oh, no, we can't have that. That is a liberty. That is a freedom. That is a... that's going a bit too far, so to speak. So we need to crack down on that. We need to do away with that. We need to get rid of that. No, honey, the minute you start chipping away at any freedom, I don't care whose it is, the minute you start chipping away at that, you are going to find that before too long, your liberties and your freedoms are also going to be under attack. It happens in every democracy. Okay, it happens. When Castro came into Cuba, he came in with cheers. Okay, people were cheering. They were thrilled. Now you have people, of course, he's long since gone, but after a period of time, you had people trying to leave that country by the thousands. People leaving on boats that they weren't even sure were seaworthy enough to reach the coast of Florida, but they were willing to risk their life because life in Cuba had become so oppressive. But wait a minute, he came in with everybody cheering and everybody yelling and how wonderful he was. Same thing with Hitler in Germany. Everybody was cheering. Everybody was saluting him. He was their savior. He was gonna fix everything. And before too long, he had half their population lying dead on the soil of Europe because he was a warmonger and he was a nut who thought that they could conquer the world. And I'm here to tell you, God told the nation of Israel when they spoke to Samuel and told him that they wanted a king, God told Samuel, he said, tell them, let me tell you what happens when a king is installed. Didn't have anything to do per se with Saul, who would later be chosen by God to be king. It is the nature of power given to most men. It takes a certain character. It takes certain qualities. It takes certain amount of integrity and morality and character to be able to assume a position of great power and not be utterly corrupted by that power. This is why it is so important when you vote for somebody that you vote for somebody who is above all else a good, decent human being. That should be the first thing on your list. Oh, but no, Christians, the Republican Party for decades has convinced you that abortion is the greatest issue. Abortion is the most important thing. That's what you're supposed to vote according to the issue of abortion. So you idiots go out to the polls and you vote for the most immoral, the most ungodly, the most demonic, a man with no character, with no integrity, with no morality whatsoever. All because you've allowed yourself like a donkey to be led out by the nose over one or two issues. I grew up in the fundamentalist Christian world. I grew up being told that babies and children automatically went to heaven when they died because they weren't old enough to be held accountable for their sin, even though we were told that supposedly we're born into a sinful state. But somehow or another, fundamentalists and evangelicals tell us that children and babies and infants automatically, if they die, automatically go to heaven. Well, if that's the case, then every aborted baby is in heaven. My God, you think it'd be better for them to be here? You think it'd be better for them to go through this life? You think it'd be better for them to be born into potentially abuse? You think it's better for them to have to go through the struggles and the trials of this life? See, here's the problem, my fundamentalist friend. When it comes to your claims relative to your faith, and I'm going to say this as plain as I can say it, because like I've said, that's the only way I know how to talk. You're full of crap. You are full of crap. You don't believe half of what you say. You don't believe half of what you preach. You don't believe half of what you teach. If you did, then you would say, well, these children are in God's presence. They were able to skip ahead in the line. They didn't have to go through the struggles like, oh, but every person has a right to life. Sweetheart, what is better? A life in this world or an eternity in God's presence? Where's your faith? Where's your belief system? What on earth is wrong with you? But they claim, oh yeah, we believe that all children automatically go to heaven and they're in the presence of God. Okay. Well, when you understand, as the Democratic Party has been trying to say now for years, when you understand that it is just morally corrupt to try to exercise power over another human being's body. And it is insanity for the state to try to infringe so heavily upon the liberties of women so as to demand that they do thus and so with their body. What if the state, what if Donald Trump, who's obviously, I'm sorry folks, I'm kind of coughing a lot today. He's already losing his marbles, and anybody with an IQ in the double digits can see that. What if he decides all of a sudden one day, when he holds dictatorial power and he's able to just yell out mandates and sign into law any stupid thought he has in his head? And what if he decides that all women have to be, no bigger than a 10% body fat? Let's use that as a figure. I hate fat women. I can't stand that Rosie O'Donnell. I can't stand these fat women. We need to make a law. Women need to be thin. They need to be pretty. By the way, that is something that Adolf Hitler used to say. And what if he decides all of a sudden that you've got to be within a certain weight factor, and if you're not, then you go to jail, and they'll help you to lose that weight. They'll starve you so you can lose that weight. What if that comes to pass? You sit there and you say, oh, that'll never happen. That's ridiculous. That's a bridge too far. No, it's not, folks. No, it's not. I've said for many years now on our podcast, and excuse me, even as I was speaking to individuals and what have you, I have said over and over again that Donald Trump used Adolf Hitler's playbook when running for president. He literally, it was as if he went through Adolf Hitler's quotes, and interestingly enough, in a article back in the 1990s, Vanity Fair did an article about Ivanka Trump, his first wife, and she said in that article, it's in print, she said that Donald had a book of Adolf Hitler's speeches on his nightstand by the bed. Now we know, we've heard all kinds of testimony that Trump is not much of a reader. But isn't it interesting? It wasn't a Bible on the nightstand next to his bed. Oh no, it wasn't a Bible. It was a speech of all things in the world of Adolf Hitler's speeches. I've said over and over and over again, the minute I heard Trump announce his run for presidency, the minute I heard his first speech, I said, "Dear Jesus," I told Tommy, I said, "this man is literally using Adolf Hitler's playbook. It's like he's taken all of Adolf Hitler's quotes and he's using them as advice." Don't believe me? Let me run some past you. Every one of these now, mind you, is historically on record. They come from a number of sources. They may have been in his book, Mein Kampf, or My Struggle. They may come from various conversations he had with different people. I'm not going to go through, like the sources and where they came from, because I want to cover a few of them today. Well, let's listen to some of what Adolf Hitler said. He said, "If you wish the sympathy of the broad masses, you must tell them the crudest and most stupid things." What do you think? From where I sit over the last 9 years, I absolutely see Donald Trump in that quote. I don't know about you. Maybe it's just me. I don't know about you. He said, quote, "Tell a lie loud enough and long enough, and people will believe it." End quote. I don't know about you. I see Donald Trump in that. Quote, listen carefully, "Let me control the textbooks, and I will control the state." End quote. Quote, "What luck for governments that the people are stupid." End quote. Do any of you watching, any of you hearing this, do you see Donald Trump in any of these quotes? Listen to this. Quote, "The greater the crime perpetrated by the leadership, the less likely it is that the people will ever believe their leaders to be capable of perpetuating such an event." End quote. January 6th, they said the greater the crime that you committed by the leadership, the less likely people will believe that their leaders were capable of actually causing such an event or making such an event happen. Donald Trump's worshipers will swear up and down that he had nothing to do with January 6th. Nothing he said, nothing in all the weeks and months leading up to that event. He had no part in it. Yet, interestingly enough, I was saying before January 6th, there's going to be violence on January 6th. Those people are going to attack the Capitol on January 6th. There were other people, not a lot, but there were a few who were predicting the same thing. How is it that we already could see that violence not potentially was going, I knew it was going to happen. There was no way around it. It was absolutely going to happen. How did I know? Because God spoke to me from heaven with a thundering voice. I didn't need God to speak to me with a thundering voice. I heard what Donald Trump was saying. I saw the tweets he was putting out. Clearly, he was manipulating. Clearly, this guy was using his abilities to manipulate and connive. Clearly. And the end game was violence. Many people beside myself saw that. So how is it that we could see it coming, and yet after the fact, you still can't see that this man was the primary instigator of the entire thing? He was at the top of the entire event. But again, you see what Hitler had to say about it. He also said, quote, "It is quite special. It is a quite special secret pleasure how the people around us," listen carefully, "fail to realize what is really happening to them." End quote. Adolf Hitler. Quote, "It is not truth that matters, but victory." End quote. Folks, my God Almighty, can you not see Donald Trump? It's like he read this and said, aha, okay, so that's how I need to do things. Ah, okay, so that works to my advantage. Oh, okay, so this is how I need to, do you follow? Every single one of these quotes, you can see what Hitler is speaking of. You can see it operating in and through Donald Trump. It is not truth that matters, but victory. So in other words, lie your fool head off. It don't matter how much lying you do. It doesn't matter how much conniving you do. It doesn't matter how much deceiving you do. As long as in the end you win. That's all that matters. Hitler said, quote, and I want to make a point here because I guarantee you these social networks will try to shut down this particular podcast. You watch and see. I've already had trouble with some little videos that I've put out. By no means am I preaching Hitler's message. By no means am I encouraging any kind of violence, or am I encouraging any kind of thing of that nature. I am quoting Hitler to demonstrate that Donald Trump clearly is walking in a path that was established by these rules that Hitler spoke. These are observations that he made, and this is his advice, as it were. Hitler said, quote, "Terrorism is the best political weapon, for nothing drives people harder than a fear of sudden death." End quote. Listen to this one. This one will really get you. Quote, "If you don't like a rule, just follow it. Reach on the top and change the rule." So he said, you don't like a rule? Well, live by it until you can get yourself in a position to change it. We haven't seen that at all, have we? Quote, "We have to put to we have to put a stop to the idea that it is a part of everybody's civil rights to say whatever he pleases, end quote. Folks, I was a Republican for years. I registered originally as a Republican when I was 18 years old. Ronald Reagan was running for re-election. I really liked Reagan. I was not as, during that period of my life, I was not focused on politics a great deal. So, I look back in history and I realized, dear Lord, he did a lot of things I'm not happy with and things I disagree with and what have you. But the old saying, hindsight's 20/20. But at the time when he came into office, our country was in a lot of mess. I mean, economically, it was a disaster. I don't know if some of y'all are old enough to remember. You may have been in your parents' cars as they sat in gas lines, and you had there was a fuel shortage, and therefore, if your vehicle license plate ended with a certain number, then you could only buy gas on certain days. And if, in different states had different rules for this, and prices that were through the roof. Interest rates on mortgages were insane. I remember that at the time. And the economy was in shambles. Poor Jimmy Carter was overwhelmed by the office of president. He was a great man, and I honestly believed that. I believed it then. I really did. I thought he was a terrific guy, but he just was not, he was not in a position to be president. And not that he could have prevented half of what happened, because, again, people don't understand. Half of what happens in our country it's the same for every country in the world. It is affected by any number of factors that are beyond our control. At the time, the majority of our fuel supplies came from other countries, primarily from the Middle East. At the time, that's where we were getting the largest part of our oil supply. And when they decided they were going to slow down production and they weren't going to put as much out, and they were going to hike up the price because supply and demand. When demand is high and supply is low, prices go up. So when they decided they were going to start playing these games, it began to affect our economy in a very serious way. All you have to do is hike up gas prices, and immediately the entire economy is affected. You say, how is that? Why would that be the case? Because there is not one single item on the shelf in the store you shop at that didn't have to be delivered to that store. And delivery costs all of a sudden rise. Shipping costs rise. So now we have to pass that additional cost onto the consumer. So all of a sudden prices begin to rise, okay? And so the economy was haywire, and I liked Ronald Reagan. He had been in office 4 years. To me personally, as an 18-year-old kid, he was kind of grandfatherly, and there was a certain calmness, and there was a certain, if Ronald Reagan said, folks, everything's going to be fine, everything's going to be good, if he said that, you believed him. You honestly believed him, simply because they called him the great communicator. He just had a way of communicating to people. And in the midst of all that turmoil, he could speak calm. He could help you to feel like in the midst of all this trouble that it was going to be okay. And anyway, so I registered originally as a Republican. I was a Republican for many years before I finally saw the light and got saved and jumped out of that mess, okay? So you're not talking to somebody who has not been within the Republican Party. As a matter of fact, I had a woman approach me many, many years ago. She was dating my great uncle, and she was very heavily involved in politics in Hartford, Connecticut, the state I grew up in. And we were talking, and of course, I used to be able to, man, I could spout all the Republican planks on their platform. I could spout out Republican ideology like a lunatic. And so we were talking, and she was Republican, you know, and she loved the way I said things. She loved the way that I worded things when I was explaining Republican ideals and what have you. And she said to me, have you ever thought about working as a speechwriter? She said, I know some folks in Hartford that would be very interested. She said, because honestly, you have a way of putting these things into words that would really be marvelous for a lot of our Republican politicians. So when I say I was in it pretty deep, you know, I was in it pretty deep. I bought into a lot of that foolishness, okay? But the reality is this: I literally saw things. I saw hypocrisy. And I'm going to tell you something. If there's anything in this world that drives me up the wall, it's hypocrisy. I cannot stand people who make a rule, apply it to themselves, to others, and then ignore it for themselves. And I literally watched the Republican Party over and over again at a state level, at a federal level. They would run on a platform of fiscal responsibility and lowering the debt and blah, 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 blah. And every single time a Republican got into office, they did exactly the opposite of everything they ran on. And it didn't take me a real long time to see that this was the case. And I said, well, now, wait a minute. How come the debt is our biggest concern when a Democrat is in office? But when a Republican gets in, all of a sudden, like now, we've actually got a ding-a-ling in Washington who's literally trying to say we just need to throw away the debt ceiling. Are you insane? This man ran casinos out of business, and how you can run a casino into bankruptcy, only God knows. Casinos are on the winning end, 90 cents out of every dollar, okay? The profit levels in a casino are insane. How you can lose money in the casino gaming industry, nobody knows. Name somebody else who did the same thing Donald Trump did. Name them. Tell me who they were. You're not going to find very many people that were able to run casinos into bankruptcy like Donald Trump. He stands alone. There's one of the areas where, once again, you know, he's ahead of the rest. This guy spends and spends. Ever since he was a youth, he spends money he doesn't have. He borrows money to spend it. He borrows money against his properties. To improve the properties? No. Talk to people who have lived in his buildings. I've seen all kinds of exposés. I've seen all kinds of documentaries. People who lived in Trump buildings talking about things were just breaking down and tearing up, and they could not get them fixed. They could not get anybody to repair them. The man never wanted to put money into his business. He wanted to spend. He wanted to be like these multi-billionaires. You know why? At his inauguration, he had all these billionaires behind him, because he's trying to show them, look what I'm doing, look what I've accomplished. Pretty shortly, I'm going to be sitting where you're sitting. I'm going to be at the same level you're at, because that has been his goal from day one. He was quoted as saying in his, I believe it was in his book, The Art of the Deal, but I may be wrong. But there is a quote with Donald Trump saying, I don't believe you can be too selfish. So I don't think it's possible to be too selfish. The man ran companies out of business by hiring them, and once they had done the work, refusing to pay them. He would find something that he could complain about and use that as a ruse for not paying them. By the way, I used to watch my father do that same exact thing. And he spent the money that he borrowed on his casinos. He spent the money that he borrowed on his buildings, rather than investing it into his business, rather than improving the properties. No. He just spent it frivolously, trying to be the king. He lived in a golden gilded apartment. Mark Cuban doesn't live in a golden gilded apartment. Jeff Bezos doesn't live in a golden gilded apartment. Mark Zuckerberg doesn't live in a golden gilded apartment. Who on earth lives like that? How many people in this world have ever had a desire to live in an environment that was so opulent and so ostentatious and gaudy, trying to demonstrate this incredible wealth and, success? Well, I can give you a list of names of people who have done such things. There's people like, there's Saddam Hussein. There's Marcos in the Philippines. There's Idi Amin down in Africa, on the African continent. That's what it is. It's dictators. That's right. Because they love to rape economically their own people and fill their own pockets. And because a narcissistic personality lends itself to dictatorship, they have no conscience whatsoever. I mean, none. And they can do you as dirty. Honey, they can put you in front of a firing squad and watch you get shot dead, and they will feel nothing. They will have no feelings whatsoever. Honest to God. And my father, I told you, I grew up with a narcissist father. And matter of fact, one of the reasons Trump bothers me so bad is because he and my father are so much alike. That's why Trump, there's not a thing in the universe Trump does that surprises me. I've seen it all before. Okay? Narcissists are incredible actors. Oh my goodness, man, can they put on a show. In order to manipulate people, in order to connive people, they can act any role you give them, baby, they will outdo Glenn Close. When my parents were going through a divorce, finally, after more than 20 years of a miserable, horrible, horrendous marriage, my mother finally decided to leave my father. And my father, all of a sudden, after my whole life talking about God being bunk and religion is bunk and you're stupid for believing in that foolishness and they're just brainwashing you and that's what I heard my whole life, folks, from my father. And after all that, all of a sudden, he knew that the number one most important thing to my mother was she always wanted her husband to be a Christian. And when my father and mother first met, he played the game. He played along a little bit. He went to church a little bit. And my mother, who was only 18 at the time, foolishly fell for the guy and wound up honestly getting pregnant and having to marry him, because back then that's what you did. My father had no interest in marriage. He never wanted to be a husband. He never wanted to be a father. He was a womanizer like nothing you've ever seen in your life, except maybe Donald Trump. Slept with everything that had two legs and called itself a female, and couldn't care less about his family, didn't care if they ate, didn't care if we had groceries at home. He bought toys constantly. He spent his money on himself. He constantly was spending enormous amounts of money on lavish things for himself. I remember him spending, I'm talking folks back in the late 70s when Jimmy Carter was in office. I remember my father spending $6,000 then on a stereo. A stereo. He had a custom cabinet made for it. I mean, you know, he was so proud of this stereo, boy. That thing gave him bragging rights. And anytime anybody come around the house, he had to show them every, detail of this stereo and every feature of this stereo. And it had a record player that stood up like this, so you had to put the disc up on it like that, and then you closed the arm and it played. I mean, it was real space age looking compared to most, and it was component. It was not a console stereo where everything was built into one thing. No, it was different components. You had the record player, you had the tape deck, you had the receiver and the amplifier and blah, blah, blah. Okay? I grew up with Donald Trump. I grew up with a man who could lie as quick as he could blow his nose. I grew up with a man who constantly gaslighted you. Constantly gaslighted you. You're crazy. You didn't see that. You're crazy. You didn't hear that. I never said that. And he would say that over and over and over. He never let up. Not one time did my father ever say, well, you know what, actually, I thought about it, and no, I didn't say that. I was thinking about when I said thus and so. Never. No. He was perfect. He knew exactly what he said at all times. He never made a mistake. Everybody around him was worthless piles of manure who weren't capable of doing anything and had no brain in their head and couldn't think and blah, 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 including his kids. But he was perfect. And we used to have to listen to him. Grown-up's kid, my God, that man bragged on himself constantly. I heard more stories about him, lifting cars up off the ground all by himself because he needed to get a tool out of underneath it. And bless God, I just lifted the car up by the bumper and moved it over. And I mean, I'm telling you folks, I've heard all that. I lived through all that. Try to maintain your sanity when you have somebody who literally stands there every day of your life telling you, you didn't see what you just saw. You didn't hear what you just heard. You did not experience what you just experienced. You do not feel what you say you're feeling, because you never had a right to your feelings. And me, unfortunately, I was a hypersensitive kid. Nowadays, we refer to it as empathic, having almost an overly abundant sense of empathy. And so I used to cry a lot. I'd see something on TV that broke my heart, and I'd start crying. Or I'd hear about somebody at school and their house burned down and their cat died, and I'd start bawling. Because I felt so bad for the kid, or I felt so bad for the people. And my father would mercilessly make fun of me constantly for crying. I was a faggot, I was a pansy, I was a sissy because I cried over everything and laugh at me. And guess what? My two brothers, who were trying to please dad like most people do when you're with a narcissist, they'd get in on the act. So now, even when my father wasn't around, if I started crying over something, they would start in on me. Guess what? My mother lived with my father long enough so that she got in on the act. And even as an adult today, I hate to say, I've had experiences where something touched me and I began to cry a little bit, and my mother would say, "See, there he goes again, starting to cry." I'm nearly 60 years old. She's almost 80. And still I hear about these things, okay? Say, "Pastor, what are you trying to say?" What I'm trying to say to you is, don't try to kid a kidder. Don't think you're going to fool me. Don't think Donald Trump is going to pull the wool over my eyes. It is not going to happen. I grew up with everything I see that man do, I grew up with. Okay, everything I see him do. Now, the political things he's done and the way he's run his campaigns, those things, as I've said before, are right out of Hitler's playbook. And what I began to talk about, and then I went off on a tangent, is the fact that Republicans always tout freedom of speech, freedom of speech. But they only believe in freedom of speech as long as you're saying what they approve of. Anything that is dissenting, anything that is different, anything in opposition to what they believe or what they say, that they want silenced. Oh, but at the same time, they're screaming freedom of speech. I used to watch Rush Limbaugh. I started saying this the other day in one of my podcasts, and then I went off on a tangent and lost my place and never did come back, so I'll finish it now. I used to watch Rush Limbaugh for about a year or two, and I kind of became a fan. This is back while Reagan was still in office, and so the early 80s. And every election, I heard him, "We can't let this senator win in this state. We can't let this Democrat win a seat in the House in this state. We can't let Bill Clinton become president because they're going to come after our guns. The first thing they're going to do is come for our guns and they used fear mongering constantly. And these prophets, so-called, within the Republican echo chamber were constantly prophesying, and I don't mean in a religious sense, but predicting all kinds of outcomes. During the civil rights movement, they claimed that if blacks and whites were allowed to live in the same neighborhoods, that property values were going to fall because blacks were going to mess up the neighborhood and they weren't going to take care of their property. And oh my God, if you had a black person living next to you, you can just bet your property's going to go down to half its value. They used to say this kind of stuff, people. I'm not kidding. They used to say, you don't want to hire blacks because blacks are lazy. They don't work hard like white men do. White men work hard. My grandfather, I'll tell you, when it come to racism and prejudice, he didn't have patience for it. And he'd hear that kind of garbage, and man, he could cuss like a sailor's parrot, and he'd start cussing and saying, "That's a pile of crap." Said, "I work with black men, and they work every bit as hard as I do, if not harder. They try to support their families and do." But I remember a time when if you were black, my God, it was legal. It was legal for employers to not hire you strictly on the basis of your race. The minute you walk through the door and they saw black skin, they might interview you, but in the back of their mind, they're saying, nope, this guy's going right in the can. And that was legal. And that is what Trump is trying to return us to literally right now. And he's doing it slowly. Now, all these media prophets would talk about all these horrific things that were going to happen if a Democrat got elected to this, that, and the other thing as a governor and blah, blah, blah. And it never, ever happened. All these, and I'm sorry, but folks, I get so tired, all these dingbats who believed all this garbage that they predicted if Joe Biden won. And did Joe Biden come after our guns? Did Joe Biden try to make us a socialist country? Well, these foolish people think he did because they believe everything that comes out of the conservative echo chamber. And let's go back to Hitler's quotes and you'll see why they operate the way they operate. Hitler said, quote, by means of shrewd lies, unremittingly repeated, it is possible to make people believe that heaven is hell and hell is, and that heaven is hell and hell heaven. Listen, the greater the lie, the more readily it will be believed. How satanic, think about it for a minute, how satanic must Adolf Hitler have been that he could be on record through history as having said these things. The things he's saying, it sounds like he's writing a rule book that's being dictated by Satan himself. These are not godly principles. These are not Christian principles. These are not righteous principles. No, all of these things he's saying are in complete contradiction to righteousness and godliness and true holiness. But now listen. Sorry, I've got to move my page down here a little bit so I can see. Okay, another quote is this. I am convinced, Hitler said, that I am acting as the agent of our almighty Creator. Listen, by fighting the Jews, I am doing the Lord's work. Yeah, they're God's chosen people. God uses the Jewish people and the Jewish nation as a time clock for God's people. We literally are able to watch the end of this age wind down. We're able to see it come closer and closer to the end simply by watching what's going on and what's happening in Israel, because the majority of prophecies concerning the end time have to do with things related to Israel. So God kind of gave that to us as a clock on the wall, so to speak, so we can watch it and we can see we're getting closer and closer and closer to the midnight hour. But this man says, oh, I'm acting on behalf of the divine Creator. I'm acting on behalf of God. How? By trying to eliminate the Jewish people from the face of the earth. I'm going to tell you something, and let me speak this prophetically to you, folks. There are all kinds of people cheering Donald Trump as he signs these various executive orders and edicts and what have you. Right now, he's got people cheering, including the religious right. But let me tell you what's going to happen. Donald Trump is one of the most ignorant and stupid human beings I've ever seen in my life. I mean, honestly, you heard what Hitler said about saying stupid things, saying insanely goofy things. Well, those are the things that Donald Trump says. And he doesn't know a whole lot about nothing. And he certainly doesn't know anything about running a country, okay? He is being handled. He's, like I said the other day, he's got theocrats on one side and he's got the wealthy on the other. Both of them are trying to manipulate to get their ends. These over here, their interest and their objective is related to the economy, related to money. These over here, it's related to morality and people's conduct and people's actions. So each of them are coming at him for different pieces of the pie. They're not both coming with, they don't necessarily have conflicting interests either, you know, because they're wanting different things from him. But what's going to happen is, at some point, Donald Trump is going to, in his brilliant mind, he's going to come up with some brilliant scheme, some brilliant idea, and he is going to make a decision that is going to bring down the wrath of the religious right. They're going to have a conniption. They are going to have a fit. I'm not sure that it won't be Trump deciding that the United States shouldn't be putting as much money and resources into the nation of Israel that we've been investing. After all, it's America first, isn't it? Isn't it about America first? I'm not saying for certain that's what's going to happen, but I'm just kind of curious. But something of that sort. And when it happens, there's going to be a lot of people within the religious right who are going to start griping. And they're going to start complaining. They're not going to like what he decided. They're not going to like what he's doing. And that is going to trigger him turning on the church in America. All of a sudden, I wouldn't be surprised if his next idea wasn't churches should pay taxes. And of course, they're not going to like that idea either. And all of a sudden, you see, this man is going to start turning on the people who supported him, because that is what dictators do. When they get to the place where they no longer need you, a narcissist will throw you away like used tissue. The minute they no longer need you, they will discard you. My father used to be that way. You wouldn't believe how this guy could charm people, how he could manipulate people and use people. It was terrible. I literally watched him brag to my mother and laugh about how he had just gotten over on his own brother. He did a business deal with his own brother and sold him something. And my father laughed about it. He was proud of himself for what he had done. And he was telling my mother about it. And he said, you know, look what I did, His own brother. Narcissists have no loyalty whatsoever. If one of Donald Trump's kids ever turned on him, he would do them the same identical way that he does every single former cabinet member and former staffer that has turned on him. He would do his own children the same identical way. And they know it. That's why they toe the line. That's why they are obedient and submissive. They know that my father will go out of his way to destroy my reputation, to destroy me. Because the fact that he's my father, when you're dealing with a narcissist, means absolutely nothing. Nothing. My father used to speak evil of his family members, his brothers, his sisters. His brothers were a bunch of whoremongers and drunks and no goods and lazy. His sisters were a bunch of whores and this and that. I'm serious, folks. I'm not even joking. He said this of his mother. I grew up my entire life, and I may have visited my grandparents' house as a child, I would say maybe 3 or 4 times on my father's side. He did not let us go around his family at all. And I've come to realize part of narcissist is manipulating, what you know and what information. He didn't want us to ever hear anything from a family member of his that might help us to understand, things he had done and things, and one of the things that narcissists are great at is projecting. And when I was a teenager and I became my house chauffeur, once I got my license, my mother was more than happy to have me run around driving my brothers to school, driving my brothers to baseball practice, doing all the driving around so she didn't have to be bothered. So I became the home chauffeur. Well, my mother and I decided I was working. My mother decided she was going to help me get a car. Well, my father did not want me to get a car. He, again, had to be in control of everything. And every time that I would even mention a car that I looked at, that I was interested in, he would tell me what a piece of crap they were and what garbage they were and how unpredictable they were and blah, blah, blah. And he would tell me all these horror stories, every single model, every single car. He just didn't want me to have a car. And finally, at one point, my mother and I went to a new car dealer, a Ford dealer, and we got a little Ford Escort. Those of you that might remember the Escort, the entry-level car, except maybe for the Fiesta, which was below it, which was cheap little tin box on wheels. But anyway, I got this little Escort, and my father had a fit. And his big line was always, you're not going to have an accident on my insurance and cost me my house. How many people have had accidents and lost their house because of, the accident? How many people do you know that have experienced that? I never knew anybody. I've never seen anybody. I've never known anybody who lost their house because they had to, pay off some kind of a legal thing, but that was part of his manipulation. And then he would constantly project, you're not gonna screw me and make it so I wind up having to pay for that car because you aren't paying for it and blah, 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 blah. And I was fully prepared to pay for it. But he projected and projected. Long story short, I had to give the car back. But anyhow, I found out later in life from an aunt of mine, much later in life, when I was able to begin to reach out to my family, including my father's parents, and establish a relationship. I began to do that when I was about 18, 19. I began to make the effort on my own to do that, and did real well with it, as a matter of fact, and adored my father's parents till the day they died. I had a wonderful relationship with them, and they really loved me, and I loved them dearly, and I saw them very differently than what my father had told us the entire time we were growing up as kids. And but I found out from my aunt, my father's sister, that twice my father had convinced his dad to co-sign for him on a car, and then he stuck his father for the bill. My grandfather wound up having to pay for the car because my father skipped out. and left him holding the bag. So you see, that's what narcissists do. They use people, they play people, even his own dad. Then they turn around and they project onto you all the tactics, all the things that they do. They're constantly accusing everybody else. My father constantly accused every man around of being a whoremonger and sleeping with every woman on the side. He was doing that. I knew he was doing that. My mother didn't at that time, but I knew it. And but he projected constantly. I grew up with that foolishness. Let's listen real quick, and then I've been on for quite a while, I know. But I want to just read a few more of these glorious Hitler quotes to you. Quote, "The receptivity of the masses is very limited. Their intelligence is small." Now listen. "But their power of forgetting is enormous. In consequence of these facts, all effective propaganda must be limited to a very few points and must harp on these in slogans until the last member of the public understands what you want him to understand by your slogan." During Trump's campaign, what were the popular slogans? Build that wall. Build that wall. Build that wall. What was the popular slogan in this last campaign? I forget how they worded it now, but it was about mass deportation. I think it might have been mass deportation now, but literally, you see, this is what they do. They introduce a point, but they do it in the simplest way possible. They put a few words together and then they repeat those constantly. They harp on a point or two, maybe three, and they never deviate from that. When Donald Trump ran the first time, I said, this guy isn't saying anything. He is saying nothing. He is not articulating in any way how he can do anything. All he's doing is saying, oh, I can do this, I can do that, I can fix this, I can fix that. How are you going to fix it? If you're so smart, how are you going to fix it? He never answered those questions. He would go off and he would deflect. He would lead you off in another direction, which is another narcissistic tendency. And he never, ever, ever answered any kind of a technical question. He never answered any kind of a real substantive question. No, he always harped on what I refer to as the high notes, okay? Those were his slogans. Make America great again. Make America great again. We've got our slogan, okay? Lock her up, lock her up, lock her up during the first campaign related to Hillary. And this man was literally following Adolf Hitler's playbook, folks. Hitler said, and I'm paraphrasing, people are stupid. And frankly, he's right. The majority of people are not, bright people, really smart people are not in the majority in the human race. That's just a reality, sad to say. Most of the people in our world today, I've come to realize, thanks to the internet, are dumb as bricks. And they can be led about by the nose as easy as you can lead anything, by the nose, politically, speaking. And Hitler said they have short memories. They don't remember very long. And I noticed that years ago, many years ago, I saw that in people. I'd see, Republicans running for office, and I'd say, well, don't these people remember what the last guy did? Don't they remember what the last Republican did? And he was preaching the same message, and yet look what he accomplished. Look what he did. And no, people don't remember nothing. Donald Trump's running in 2024 for president, and nobody's even talking about his handling of COVID. Nobody's thinking. No, that's forgotten. That's past. January 6th again. Oh, that's past. Forgotten. People forget about it. And this, Hitler said, is something that you can count on. You can count on this. And for that reason, the best, most effective propaganda must be limited to a very few points and must harp on these in slogans until the last member of the public understands what you want him to understand by your slogan. Now listen to this quote. Quote, "The state must declare the child to be the most precious treasure of the people. As long as the government is perceived as working for the benefit of the children," listen carefully, "the people will happily endure almost any curtailment of liberty and almost any deprivation." Do you know what the abortion issue is, folks? It's not a bunch of godly politicians who give a flying fig about the life of the unborn. No. It's Hitler's playbook. You've got to declare that you're working in the interests of children. You're the party that's trying to protect the children. Marjorie Taylor Greene gets out there and talks about, look at these horrible books that are available to our children. Look at what they're doing. Look at what they're saying to our children. That has been a Republican theme now for years. I told you, this whole plot has been working for a long time, long before Donald Trump came along. Donald Trump just happened, when he appeared, the party looked and said, aha, wait a minute, now we've got a guy who has no conscience whatsoever, and he's dumb as a brick. He has no interest but filling his own pockets. So as long as we are willing to rubber stamp anything he does that enriches himself, we'll get him to do whatever we want him to do. And that's the relationship that the Republican Party has with Donald Trump. This is why during his first term he was a grifter. He was constantly pulling money out of government coffers, having events at his facilities and charging the government exorbitant fees. He's got the Secret Service staying at his facilities, and they're charging them for the rooms. They're using golf carts. They charge them for the golf carts. I mean, this guy just put a straw in the treasury and sucked it up. And the Republicans, what's that you say? I don't see what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about. His facilities are wonderful facilities, so it makes sense that we would have this there. They covered for him. Why? Because they had a relationship established with him. You can grift. You can do the American people as dirty as you want to do them. We don't care. You can enrich yourself any way you want to enrich yourself. But if we put a bill in front of you, sign it. If we put a name in front of you for the Supreme Court, you're going to nominate that person for the Supreme Court. Donald Trump doesn't know jack squat about law. He doesn't know jack squat about our legal system. He doesn't know nothing about nothing. If you put 30 names in front of him for the Supreme Court, he's not going to sit there and spend hours and days trying to research and figure out which of those people is most qualified. Look at the people by the dozens that were appointed to federal benches around the country who were nothing like Eileen Cannon. They were nothing but sycophants. They were nothing but judges that Trump could count on to help him achieve his ends. And folks, I got a little news for you. When Hitler first gained any power in Germany, reshaping the judicial system in Germany was at the top of his priorities. That was one of the first things he did, along with deregulation and befriending the wealthiest in the country. Those things, read, my God. Just go out online and search for an article on how did Hitler attain power in Germany? And you'll see when he got his hands, at first, he wasn't the top dog. He was underneath the top dog. But he was in a position where he was able, because the way Germany's system was organized, he was able to do quite a bit. And he took advantage of everything that he was able to do. And what he did was he literally used what he was able to do to make it possible for him in the future to do other things that, had he not first done these things, he could have never done. During Trump's first term, that is exactly what they were doing. They were trying to set things up so that in the second term they could do exactly what they're doing now, and he would have a grease skid. There wouldn't be any obstacles in the way, because they would have had the judiciary all lined up. They would have had all kinds of judges in their back pocket. Folks, when I tell you that this man is operating from Adolf Hitler's playbook, I'm not joking. That is not a joke. I wish people would understand that. Quote, brutality creates respect, end quote. Listen to what Hitler had to say about America. He said, quote, I don't see much future for the Americans. It's a decayed country, and they have their racial problem and the problem of social inequalities. My feelings against Americanism are feelings of hatred and deep repugnance. Everything about the behavior of American society reveals that it's half Judaized, meaning it's influenced by the Jews, and the other half negrified, meaning influenced by the black population. How can one expect a state like that to hold together? Now, mind you, Trump has had, from his first trip down the golden escalator at Trump Tower, he has had the support of white supremacists. He has had the support of white nationalists in this country, groups, from day one. He's had the support of neo-Nazi groups from day one. They marched down there, I forget where it was now, Charlotte, and all those horrific things that transpired, and a lady wound up dead. Neo-Nazis. Those people worship Hitler. Everything he says in their mind is pure gold, and they fully support Donald Trump. My God, people, what does that tell you? Hitler said, quote, and I'm going to finish in a minute, I promise. I've been on a long time, and I will finish in a minute. He said, quote, "I'll put an end to the idea that a woman's body belongs to her. Nazi ideals demand that the practice of abortion shall be exterminated with a strong hand." You got to remember, Hitler was all about breeding the perfect race, breeding the perfect people. And we Germans, we Aryans, we're the perfect people, which is funny because he wasn't one of them. He was neither German nor an Aryan, but that was his claim. So they didn't want any babies being killed because, after all, we need the Aryan race to be strengthened by the birth of more and more children. Hitler said, quote, "Today Christians stand at the head of this country. I pledge that I never will tie myself to parties who want to destroy Christianity." Does this sound at all familiar? The quote continues, "We want to fill our culture again with the Christian spirit. We want to burn out all the recent immoral developments in literature, in the theater, and in the press. In short, we want to burn out the poison of immorality which has entered into our whole life and culture as a result of liberal excess during the past few years." End quote. Does this sound anything at all to you like one of the planks in the Republican Party's platform? Are you not seeing some similarities here, folks? This is Adolf Hitler speaking. I am literally quoting Adolf Hitler, and yet most of these things you can find on the Republican platform. Adolf Hitler said, quote, "A woman must be a cute, cuddly, naive little thing, tender, sweet, and stupid," end quote. Some of you thought I was joking when I said, what if Trump gets to the place where he gets an itch and decides he wants to dictate that women have to be under a certain weight, and you thought, oh, that'll never happen. Look where Adolf Hitler's mind was at. Look at how he looked at women. Look at his view of women. If he'd have lived and was ruling the kingdom he was trying to establish, only God knows what insanity he would have imposed upon the German people. I'm going to finish with this one. This will be my last one. And believe me, I've got literally pages of them here. Adolf Hitler, quote, "The big lie," and that's the phrase he used, "the big lie is a major untruth uttered frequently by leaders, plural, as a means of duping and controlling the constituency." There you go. I think any thinking person can hear this. And you can look it up online for yourself. Look up Adolf Hitler quotes. There are any number of websites devoted to history, and they list the quotes, Look at his quotes, and you will see Donald Trump in just about every single one of them, folks. We're in a terrible, terrible place right now. And I'm going to tell you what the Spirit of the Lord told me concerning the election of Donald Trump, because I believe the Word of God, and God says that He establishes kings and princes. It is God who determines who is in control. Okay? It is never outside of God's purview. It is never outside of God's control. What the Spirit of the Lord showed me is, said the church in America has become so carnal and so worldly that the Republican platform has become their definition of Christianity. So instead of Christianity becoming the basis for the Republican platform, no, it's the opposite. The Republican platform has become the basis of their so-called Christianity. And when we begin in our Bible study about Revelation, when we begin to look at the letters that, or the words that the Lord spoke for the different churches, boy, are you going to see some things. Republicans are greedy. They are selfish. The people in this country who have achieved the most give the least. We have literally become a people who are walking in the footsteps of Sodom and Gomorrah and her sister cities. And I do not speak of sexual immorality, because honestly, that was one of the least of their troubles in Sodom and Gomorrah. Their sexual misconduct was directly related to their idolatry. And so it's not even a matter of they just, behave themselves sexually in a immoral and improper way. That's not even where their issues lie. The fact is, their sexual misconduct was directly related to idolatry. And so America has literally become a brand new Sodom. And I'm trying to look something up real quick that I should have looked up before I started scripture. And then I hope to share it with you, and then I will leave you alone and let you go about your day. I appreciate your taking time to be with me. And let me see here. Always, for some reason, every time I want to look up this scripture, I don't know what it is about the search engine on this Bible site that I use, but if I don't put in just certain words, it will not bring up, what I'm looking for. All right, here we go. I found it. If you go to Ezekiel, let me see here, make sure, look at this. There's a pop-up window that keeps coming up. Don't you love that when you're trying to see something and a pop-up window keeps popping up in front of your eye? Look at that, another one. Good grief. This is supposed to be a Bible site, and they're constantly trying to sell you something. All right. All right, listen. This is Ezekiel chapter 16. And in Ezekiel chapter 16, going down to verse number 48, God himself articulates the sins of Sodom. He literally lists them. As I live, saith the Lord God, Sodom, thy sister, that term, when the Lord is speaking prophetically, when the Lord calls something your sister, what that means is that you look like her, you behave like her, you're in common with her. Okay, said Sodom, thy sister, hath not done she nor her daughters as thou hast done, thou and thy daughters. So God is literally saying to the Jews, you have behaved far worse than Sodom ever did. So if Sodom was supposed to be a homosexual haven and a homosexual society, then surely Israel must have become a homosexual society, because God himself says that Sodom hath not done, she nor her daughters, as thou hast done, and thy daughters. Then he goes on to tell us exactly what the sins of Sodom were. Why am I sharing this? Because I'm trying to show you there's a reason why Donald Trump is in office. There's a reason why God has allowed this to be our lot at the moment. Verse 49, behold, this was the iniquity of thy sister Sodom. Now the list: pride, fullness of bread, and abundance of idleness was in her and in her daughters. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and needy. And they were haughty and committed abomination before me. The word abomination has a idolatrous attachment to it. When you see that word, you know that idolatry is involved, okay? They committed abomination before me. Therefore, I took them away as I saw good. Folks, I'm going to tell you something. The Lord allowed this man, who is as demonic and devilish as anything I've ever seen in my life. I've told you before, he and my father just remind me so much of each other, it's scary. And my father has more devils than anything you can ever imagine. God has allowed this man to be where he's at. And it is not so much a punishment as it was a test. And the evangelical, white evangelical, because black folk weren't fooled, but the white evangelical church failed the test miserably. But I want to tell you today, we've got some difficult times coming. There's no doubt about it. Things are going to get rough. I'm going to tell you, and I'm serious as a heart attack, I've got some potatoes that I've prepared that I've got them in a warm, dry place, dark place, and you wrap potatoes, you buy your potatoes in the grocery store, wrap them in a paper towel, dampen the paper towel, and then put them in a bag that breathes. So don't put them in a baggie. Put them in a bag that allows air to pass through. Place them in a warm, dry, dark place. So like a closet somewhere that you only open the door occasionally, And, or even a closet you go into pretty often. You're not going to go in enough to make that big a difference. But they need the darkness. They need for it to be humid. They need for it to be warm. And after a few weeks, that potato is going to sprout all kinds of little eyes on it, okay? And then you can use those potatoes. You can cut them up. You leave the eyes on them. You do not remove them. You leave the eyes. You cut a piece, and you want to have at least two eyes on it. And so if you have a potato, for instance, and it has maybe 4 to 6 of those little bumpy, eyes is what we called them, then what you do is you cut it in such a way so that each piece has 2 of them, okay? And then when it comes time to plant, go online and look for your area. When is the season for planting? You plant those, literally the piece of potato. You just put it in the ground and cover it. And months later, when it comes time to harvest, you'll see the plants grow up out of the ground. It's going to be big, leafy green leaves. You'll see that. And let them be until you see the leaves dying and drying up, and leave the potatoes there even after the leaves have dried up. Leave them there about another week after the leaves have died and dried. At that point, you go, you dig them up, and you will have literally bags and bags and bags and bags of potatoes that you don't have to go to the grocery store and buy. And if things get harsh enough and hard enough, you'll be grateful that you've done that, okay? And you can do the same thing with sweet potatoes, by the way. That's something else you can do. I'm just throwing that out to you. You can do as you please. I'm in the process of putting together a greenhouse here at my house because I want to be able to grow stuff not only in the summer, but I also want to be able to grow stuff throughout the year. And I always am concerned about people, and I want to be able to help people in the church. I want to be able to help folks that need help. So that's why I'm doing this. And in the next week or so, I'm going to be spending time assembling this greenhouse that I've designed and create. I do stuff on my own. I built a shed years ago in Dallas, on my own that I had just kind of put together in my head. So anyway, I say all that to say this. We have become a modern day Sodom. Okay? Look at that list of things that I read to you. Pride, fullness of bread, meaning gluttony. We are one of the most gluttonous societies in the world. People in America, there's so much food, there's so much prosperity. The average person in America is able to live 1,000 times better than the average person in Africa. My God, we live the lives of kings, and yet we have people, like Hitler said, who have come to believe that life in America is hell. Oh my God, it's so terrible, it's so horrible. Oh, Hitler said if you properly use propaganda, you can make people believe that heaven is hell and hell is heaven. And you've got all these dingalings in the Republican Party who've allowed GOP propaganda to convince them that life in America is so horrible and so terrible. And oh my God, you've lost your liberties and you're losing your liberties. And people are chasing after red herrings and they're believing falsehoods. And they're allowing that fear and that anxiety to drive them to the polls to vote for people who are going to act in complete opposition to their self-interests. The very people they're electing are going to act in complete opposition to the self-interest of all the people that they were able to drive to the poll with lies and propaganda, fear and anxiety. But the Lord said Sodom was prideful. Prideful. Is there a nation on this planet that is more prideful than America? They are gluttonous. There is an abundance of idleness. In other words, like I was saying the other day, people have so much and some are so wealthy that they don't have to do anything. They don't have to work. They can spend all their day on their yacht. They can spend all their time traveling around the world. They can spend all their time doing absolutely nothing if they want to. There's an abundance of idleness was in her and her daughters. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and needy. Sweetie, that's the Republican platform. That's the Republican platform. I used to tout it. God forgive me. I used to tell people, well, the Bible said if you don't work, you shouldn't eat, and blah, blah, blah. But that passage is completely blown out of context in terms of then saying that you have no obligation to feed people who are hungry. No, that passage is completely blown out of context. Because whether somebody's lazy, whether somebody is, just has no ambition and doesn't want to work, whatever the cause of their situation, you still, as a child of God, are mandated to minister to them and help them. Doesn't matter why they are where they are. You're still obligated by the Word of God to try to help them. And you don't get to the next to the last thing is they were haughty. Is America, are Americans haughty? Is America as a nation haughty, full of itself, self-centered, thinks itself perfect, thinks that we can do no wrong? Yeah, that's America, all right. And the very last thing on the list, is they committed abomination before me. And their abomination was not the sex. The sex was a manifestation of the abomination, which for them was the worship of idols and false gods. All right, folks, I appreciate your being with me. I promised I would shut up and let you go. I know I've gone a long time. I'm not even going to bother apologizing for it, because I do it all the time. So, if I apologize and then I do it again, I keep apologizing, I look foolish. So I'm just going to say, I'll do these podcasts and offer whatever I have in my heart for the day. Obviously, you don't have to watch it if you don't want to. You don't have to watch the whole thing if you don't want to. Or if you're only able to see part of it live, you can always go back later and see the rest of it. It's recorded. But I really appreciate all of our friends online. I'm looking at our Facebook, and I noticed, I saw it for a minute there. I saw, Amy, that you were on, and you know how much I love you and how much I appreciate you. You really can't know how much I love you, how much I appreciate you. And each time that I've been able to go to Kansas and visit with you folks, I'm telling you, I have come home doubly blessed and feeling just so good. I enjoy your company immensely. You're wonderful people. Give my love to Clinton, the kids, and then Adam and Brendan. I saw your name online as well, and we love you. And I hope one day that we're going to get to meet you and fellowship with you. I would love to be able to do that. I can tell you, folks, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, I grew up with a granddad, I've told you, who was immensely charitable and very giving, and that man, he didn't have a selfish bone in his body. And I thank God for his example, because it really has contributed to how I view things and how I do things. And Adam, honest to God, honey, if we ever got to the place where I have the resources and we're going to have like a special meeting, like a conference or something, I would be more than happy to fly you guys out so you'd be able to come and be here with us. Unfortunately, there's no way on earth I can do such a thing right now, but God only knows what the future holds, okay? We can hope. But I would do that in a flat minute. I really would. I've been in my life, I've been in some hard spots. I've had to live on immensely horrific budgets. Matter of fact, I'm not too far from that right now. Honestly, Tommy and I were doing fairly well in Dallas. We had a great life in Dallas. And when we came here, everything has tightened up. And we're not at all living the quality of life that we had in Dallas. I kid you not. We're in a very, very, very different situation right now. And I hate to say it, but Alabama has been anything but hospitable. The people are very friendly here. I'm not saying they're not friendly. They're very friendly. They're very nice to your face, so to speak. But the spirit in this community, this is a Republican state. The spirit here is selfish and haughty and proud, and they don't care about other people. They're very self-centered and focused on their own stuff. And, Tommy and I have been here 2 years. We don't have one single friend. literally. Now, thank God we have somebody up in Tennessee for the church, and we thank God for Tim. I can't say enough how much we love him and how grateful we are for him. So far, that's what we got, and I'm happy because that's a start. You can't have a plant till you have a seed, so you got to have something to start with. So thank God we have Tim, and he is a blessing to us and an encouragement to us. But we literally don't have a friend in the world. And I've told Tommy many times, I'm living here in this house, and I'm on disability. Unfortunately, with the issues I have related to my health at this time, I cannot work. I'd work in a flat minute if I could. Honey, if ambition is not something I lack, I promise you that. Some of y'all know back in Dallas for a couple of years, I drove Uber and Lyft. I'd go out and spend 8, 10, 12 hours a day driving Uber and Lyft. And I would do that tomorrow if I could. My problem is if I went out today to try to drive Uber, literally after about an hour, I would be so tired I wouldn't hardly be able to stay awake. And when you drive Uber, a lot of times you wind up way far away from your house when you're wanting to quit for the day, and you may literally be a 45-minute drive home. And even in Dallas, by the time I quit driving Uber and Lyft, I had to do that because I'd get stuck way out in Frisco or way out in McKinney, somewhere, or out in East Texas, east of Texas, of Dallas. And it would take me 45 minutes to an hour to drive home after I decided I wanted to stop for the day. And I was stopping because I was so tired I could barely stay awake. So if you follow what I'm trying to say, I have to drive 45 minutes to an hour and I can barely stay awake. And that's dangerous, So that's the only reason I don't try to drive Uber and Lyft these days. But I spend all my time, if you wonder why I talk so much when I get online, this may be the reason, I don't know. I don't have anybody to talk to. I don't have anybody to go to coffee with. I don't have anybody to have lunch with. I don't have a family member within the nearest family members I have are in Texas, and even them, they're not family members that I'm, able to hang out with and what have you. But I have no family, I have no friends, I have nothing. It's just me and the dogs all day, every day. And I've told Tommy, I said, Tommy, at least you go to work and you're able to socialize. And he said, well, I'm not socializing. He said, I'm working with people. I said, no. People don't understand, but even within the framework of a job, you're socializing. You can talk about current events, you can talk about politics, you can talk about whatever. You can joke, you can, say funny things, you can, what I'm saying? There is a social element to working together. And I said, what I would do to have 10 or 12 people within close proximity to me all day so I didn't feel like I was shut up in a shoebox and forgotten about. And that's kind of how I feel these days. This situation has really become very different than Dallas. Dallas, Tommy and I had a lot of, not so much friends, but we did have friends. As a matter of fact, some of the people in the church in Dallas, we used to be able, they'd ask us, hey, you want to go to they had a favorite Chinese restaurant, Johnny and Bill. They had a little Chinese restaurant that they favored, and Tommy and I really liked it too. And they'd ask us, hey, would y'all like to go with us to this Chinese restaurant? And we'd go with them, And we had people that we had gotten to know at various businesses within the community. And I'm telling you folks, God blessed us so much. He gave me such favor. We could go into a Dairy Queen and get ice creams, and the girl that managed knew us and liked us, and we constantly would talk with her and visit with her and stuff while we were there, and she'd give us her ice creams for free, And We had waitresses at restaurants that we used to go to that we got to know. You know what I'm saying? So if I really wanted to get out and kind of be able to at least be around people and talk to people, there were places I could go, and there were people I could get in contact with. But that is not the case here. So keep me in prayer. And until then, I'm probably going to get online and ramble for a while. But I just hope in the course of my rambling, I say something that helps to make people think. That's my primary objective. I'm hoping that people who are not thinking will think. They'll use their head. And they will literally try to reason things out and think clearly about some things. And that those of us who are able to think can be clear-eyed as to what is going on, what is happening, and what is to come. All right, my friends, I love you all. And by the way, there were others on the list, but the preacher, like a nut, went and hit the screen. So I lost some of y'all. Now I actually see the names again. Haldar. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce your name. And Charlene and Maddie. I really appreciate very much your being with us, okay? Until we see you again, and I'll be doing another one of these tomorrow. God willing, at some point I'll rein them in. They won't be so long and rambling. But until we meet again, God bless you in Jesus' name is our prayer.
Forward Christian Life Center has moved. Our new meeting location is Comfort Suites, Nashville, 3431 Percy Priest Drive, Nashville, Tennessee 37214. We still meet Sundays at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. We hope you will come be with us this Sunday at Comfort Suites, Nashville, 3431 Percy Priest Drive, Nashville, Tennessee 37214. We look forward to having you with us.